Hello class. This video is going to focus on 2.2, which is angle relationships. There are 3 goals for this video. The first is I can calculate angle measures using the characteristics of complementary and supplementary angles. Next, I can calculate angle measures using the characteristics of perpendicular lines. And then third, I can demonstrate an understanding of what can and cannot be assumed from a diagram. And you want to open your textbook to page 75 where you will begin to take notes. So we are going to start off with the definition of complementary and supplementary angles. So complementary angles are 2 angles with measures that have a sum of 90 degrees. And then supplementary angles are 2 angles with measures that have a sum of 180 degrees. So here are some examples of complementary angles. You will notice that on the left side, the angles are adjacent. On the right side, they are not. So they can be adjacent or they cannot be. The only thing is they have to add up to 90 degrees to be complementary. And then in this example of supplementary angles, on the left side, we have non-adjacent angles. On the right side, we have adjacent angles. And again, either way works. They just have to add up to 180 degrees. Okay, think about it. So a linear pair is always supplementary, while 2 supplementary angles are sometimes a linear pair. And that is because supplementary angles can either be adjacent or they can be non-adjacent. Okay, this is example 1, complementary and supplementary angles. Find the measures of 2 complementary angles if the measure of the larger angle is 5 more than 4 times the measure of the smaller angle. So I'm going to draw a diagram. Okay, so we've got 2 angles that are complementary. They add up to 90 degrees. The smaller angle is going to be x. Okay, so the smaller angle is x. Now it says that the larger angle is 5 more than 4 times the measure of the smaller angle. So that means the larger angle has to be 5 plus 4 times x, since x is the measure of the smaller angle. Okay, so we have the 2 measures of our angle, and we know that if you add the 2 angles together, that they're equal to 90 degrees because they are complementary. So we need to solve for x. So we're going to set up an equation where we add the 2 angles together and make it equal to 90 degrees. So I have the smaller angle, which is x, plus the larger angle, which is 5 plus 4x, and that's going to be equal to 90. Okay, so now I can add together my like terms that are on the left side of the equation. So I've got x plus 4x, and if it helps, you can put a 1 in front of that x. So 1x plus 4x is 5x, plus 5 equals 90. Okay, so now we're going to solve for x. So I'm going to start by subtracting 5 on both sides. 5x comes down. 5 minus 5x is 0. 90 minus 5 is 85. And then I'm going to divide by 5 on both sides. 5 divided by 5 is 1. We're left with x. And then 85 divided by 5 is going to give me 17. Okay, so that was one of our answers. We had to find x, so x is 17. Okay, step 2, we want to find the measure of the larger angle. So 5 plus 4x, and I'm going to substitute 17, which is what we got for x, into that expression. So I have 5 plus 4 times 17. And 4 times 17 is 68 plus 5. And then 5 plus 68 is going to give me 73. So the measure of the larger angle is 73 degrees. Okay, so does your answer seem reasonable? Well, to me, we know that the two angles are complementary. So I know if I add them together, they should equal 90 degrees. So I have 73 degrees for one, and I've got 17 degrees for the other. If I add those together, that equals 90. And let's see, 73 is 5 more than 4 times the measure of the smaller angle. So yes, it does seem reasonable. Okay, perpendicularity, which is on page 76. So line segments or rays that intersect at right angles are perpendicular. Segments or rays can be perpendicular to lines or other line segments and rays. The right angle symbol indicates that the lines are perpendicular. So in the first picture, we have perpendicular lines intersect to form 4 right angles. So each of the angles in this picture is a right angle, so they're 90 degrees. And then perpendicular lines intersect to form congruent adjacent angles. So all of the angles are congruent because they are all 90 degrees. Okay, example 2, this is on page 77. So we have the tangram is a puzzle consisting of 8 flat shapes called tans, which are put together to form images. Find the values of x and y such that line AD and line EC in the tangram are perpendicular. So since the two lines are perpendicular, I'm going to draw a little perpendicular symbol, so that little right angle symbol, and the same goes for all of the angles. Okay, so it tells us that if line AD and line AC are perpendicular, then the measure of ABC is 90. So the measure from here to here, that is 90 degrees. And the measure of angle EBD, so from here to here, that is also 90 degrees. Okay, so we want to solve for y. So we will start with y. So we know that since angle ABC is 90 degrees, we can take 3y plus 15 and set it equal to 90. So we have 3y plus 15 equals 90. And then we need to solve that for y. So I'm going to start by subtracting 15 on both sides. And then I have 3y. 15 minus 15 is 0. 90 minus 15 is 75. And then divide by 3 on both sides. 3 divided by 3 is 1, so we're left with y. And then 3 goes into 75, let's see, 25 times. Okay, so that's one of our answers. So we needed to find x and y. This is y. Y is 25. Okay, so now we are going to solve for x. So if you recall, the measure of angle EBD was also 90 degrees. So that means we can set angle EBF and angle DBF. We can add them together and set it equal to 90. So we have 7x plus 10, and then plus 8x plus 5, equals 90. Okay, so we want to start by combining like terms on the left side of the equal sign. So 7x, 8x, and then 10 and 5. So 7x plus 8x is 15x. And then 10 plus 5 is 15. And that's equal to 90. And now we're going to solve for x. So I'm going to start by subtracting 15. 15x comes down. 15 minus 15 is 0. 90 minus 15 is 75. And then we're going to divide by 15 on both sides. 15 divided by 15 is 1. We're left with x. And then 15 goes into 75 5 times. So x equals 5. Okay, interpreting diagrams. This is on page 78. In geometry, figures are sketches that are used to depict a situation. They are not drawn to reflect total accuracy. Certain relationships can be assumed from a figure, but most cannot. So, what can be assumed? So, in this diagram, we can assume that all points and lines shown are coplanar. So, everything's on the same plane. We can also assume that G, H, and J are collinear since it looks like that is a line. We can assume that ray HM, ray HL, ray HK, and line CJ intersect at point H. And then we can assume that H is between point G and point J. We can assume that L is in the interior of angle MHK. So MHK is this angle. So point L would be in the interior. We can assume that angle GHM and angle MHL are adjacent angles because they share the same ray. And we can assume that angle JHL and angle LHJ are a linear pair since they're on a straight line. And we can assume that angle JHK and angle KHG are supplementary. And so they're going to add up to 180 degrees. Okay, what cannot be assumed in this diagram? So we cannot assume that anything is perpendicular. So even if they appear to be perpendicular, it does not mean that they are. We can't assume that angles are congruent unless they tell us. So even if it looks like they're congruent, doesn't mean they are. And then segments that appear congruent may not be congruent. The list of statements that can be assumed is not a complete list. There are more special pairs of angles than what is listed. And then because points of intersection can be assumed, you can identify vertical angles from the figure. So you can assume vertical angles. So angle ABE and angle DBC, those would be vertical. You could draw the little bow tie. So those would be vertical. So would angle ABD and angle EBC. And then you can also assume that angles form a linear pair. So the measure of angle EBA and the measure of angle ABD, that's going to be 180 degrees because it's a straight line. Okay, that is the end of 2.2a. Remember, you need to get at least a 75 on the quiz for this video in order to move on.